and welcome to IWFCI's Uncertain Times series. Now, this is the very first live stream in our series, How to Navigate the Current COVID Catastrophe. And I'm your MC, Anne-Marie Cross. Now, today we have the pleasure of hearing our guest speaker, the Honourable Bruce Billson, CEO of Australian Small Business and Family Enterprises Ombudsman. And later we'll also hear 5 businesses from 5 different industries, and they will have an opportunity to ask questions relating to their specific businesses. And of course, Bruce is going to provide some insights to their queries in order to help them navigate their businesses through the current situation. However, before that, I have the very best pleasure of introducing you to our International Chair, Diana Abruzzi. Welcome, Diana.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. And I'd just like to say that I'm so very, very pleased to be here with you today. And I'm just, again, having a little bit of difficulty, but I am getting there. I think we're right. Oh my goodness, that's all right. I will continue. I would like to, first of all, I'd like to introduce Anne-Marie. Everyone has seen her so many times behind the cameras and being our MC. But she is also on the Australian Business Council, of the IWFCI, Australian Business Council, and she's also an international podcaster, well known across the world. So Anne-Marie, we'd just like to thank you for your continued support from the Australian side, the international side, as you are always a wonderful MC, as you are today, and going into the background of your work. Now, I'd like to, right now, we're living in a changing world. And I'd like to, from the impact of COVID-19, with advanced technologies being ushered in and governments around the world grappling with a reset of global frameworks. We are of no illusion of hard times have fallen upon small business and the enterprises forced into economic confusion and insecurities. Therefore, we must decide to either continue to survive or to thrive, get crushed by crisis or create in a crisis. To create, we must prepare ourselves for change and to choose the right mindset to deal with it. For some, this may all look very dim, but in the long run, it represents newfound opportunities. But at all times, be prepared to think for yourself and challenge what does not sit right with you. I am a great believer in the power of one, how through determined individuals can change the course of a nation. But to survive any evolution is adaptability. The obstacles preventing adaptation are not just physical or legal, but mental. The enemy is not robots or other new technologies or even immigration. It's stagnant thinking and complacency, and the sense that you either do not need to change because you feel safe or cannot change because you are insecure and don't know how. You must be open to learning new things and have the courage to evolve and adapt. The key to your resilience and success is to believe in yourself, despite your changing circumstances. To survive takes courage and determination, and most of all, a willingness to step up and step forward. But just remember, you're not alone. You have the support of myself and of the IWFCI behind you. And I'm wishing you all very, very much my blessing and Godspeed to you all in your going forward in your new adventures. And we're going to hear some incredible women today, and I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you. Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Thank you very much, Diana. And of course, now it gives me much pleasure in introducing our guest speaker. Bruce Billson commenced his role as Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman in March 2021. Bruce brings experience and knowledge to the role of Ombudsman and an understanding of the issues facing small business, having started his own advisory business in 2016. Bruce's political career spans 30 years, including his role as Cabinet Minister for Small Business from 2013 to 2015. During this role, Bruce was instrumental in the establishment of ASBFEO and the passing of complex legislation to establish the office. Bruce has shown his dedication to small business through various board appointments, including the Franchise Council of Australia, Deakin University Business School, and Australian Property Institute, and more recently through his appointment as Administrator for the City of Whittlesea. Welcome, Bruce.
Awesome to be with you all today, and a very rousing start from Diana. Diana, may I acknowledge all your efforts and endeavours. May I also acknowledge the traditional owners. We come together from different parts of this vast continent and are reaching out into a broader global audience. To those traditional owners, past and present, may I add my respect and shared hopes for the future for them all. But today we're all jazzed about energising enterprise. This post-COVID, or we're still, for many enterprising men and women, we're still deep in COVID. This is a tough time, and so I'm going to talk a little bit through that. Thank you so much to Anne-Marie for the introduction. She fortunately left out a number of other businesses I was involved in establishing, and including a gallery and fine Australian craft business, which will probably be a bit topical later, something that my wife and I established. So I know the joys of the pillow talk of cash flow when you're in business with your spouse, and just how exciting that can be. And also the founding director of Judo Bank. We decided the best way to get better finance for small business was to take on some of the big incumbents, and enjoyed a number of years committed to that cause. But today I'm here with you as the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman, talking about navigating the current COVID catastrophe is the way it's been presented. It is a challenge, but out of challenges and problems become new opportunities emerge, and that can often be the catalyst for new business potential. So let's touch on some of that. And I thank you, Anne-Marie, for helping me navigate the slides. Just starting very quickly, onto the next slide if we could, a little quick overview of what my agency currently does. We start from a very simple premise that small businesses are the lifeblood, the engine room, a real driving force in the economy. We think about what we can do to help through our agency. We offer insights and input around government assistance, and we'll be touching on some of that in my presentation today. I'm going to spend a bit of time on digitisation and why that's so crucial. And I know many in our audience are interested in exporting, and Diana's asked me to spend a few moments on that as well. Thank you. Next slide. This is just what we all know. That's how vital and crucial and how impactful small business is to our Australian economy. And I imagine for our broader audience, this is replicated right across the OECD economies and beyond. An enormous contribution, more than a third contribution to gross domestic product, a bit under half of all the workforce in the private sector employed by small business. Stacks of them, just under 2.5 million. So that's 97% of all enterprises are small. And then looking a bit more closely, of those, 99% of those small businesses have turnover under $10 million. So that gives you a little bit of a feel for what's happening in the small business space. Next slide, thank you. What do we do in that space? Well, our goal is to, and very relevant to today's audience, creating a business environment, usually for businessmen and women, but I've tailored it for our audience today, to own and run, and where necessary, transform a business, make it the best environment for that. And I know my work will be done when people think, yep, there's no better place to start, grow, and transform a business than in Australia. We're not there yet, but that's the objective that gets us out of bed every day. Women-owned and women-led businesses are a very vital part of that picture. And we've touched on the significant proportion of those women-owned, women-led businesses that are small businesses. That middle blob, that green blob, green for go, if we can boost women's entrepreneurship, it can make an enormous contribution to our economy, a further $71 to $135 billion contribution to the economy. And right now, my agency is up and about surveying business women to see, well, what's happening in their world? What are the obstacles, the impediments? Where are there opportunities to support women's entrepreneurship in the Australian economy? And if people are happy to contribute their field evidence, their insight, their experience, there's a little tag there at the bottom of the screen pointing you towards our website where there's currently a survey, and we will try and distill all of that material together and present it not just to government or to industry associations, but the public more broadly, so that we can celebrate entrepreneurship and particularly focus on the great contribution women can and could make in the Australian economy and community if the policy settings are right. Next slide, please. That leads quickly into what my agency does. You'll see in that top left-hand corner, we advocate. We engage, we research, we survey, we accumulate field evidence and insights to provide those aha moments, those, that's a good idea, to government, to policymakers, to private sector organisations, to big business, things that can be done that add to and carry forward that objective of Australia being the best place to start, grow and transform a business. That's our advocacy function. We identify problems, we identify opportunities, we roll up our sleeve, and my team do work with my support and leadership to work out what could be better, and then we map out proposals, maybe policy change, even program refinement that would better support our goal of energising enterprise in the Australian economy. We move slightly to the right, assistance. We know when a small business is faced with a dispute or a challenge or a grievance, and the other party doesn't want to sort it out, that can have a debilitating impact on that entrepreneur and also on their business. What we do when those commercial grievances arise is people can contact my agency. In some cases, it might simply be a matter of sharing advice and some wise counsel about how to engage with the other party to identify the issue, find a solution. And our goal is to get business back to business. Where grievances arise, trying to make sure always that that important relationship between counterparties in the business world is preserved, so that there's scope to keep going forward with good, productive working relationships into the future. In some cases, that might simply be some guidance. It might be a little bit of a nudge about what a solution looks like, or it might be our office engaging with both parties and finding a path forward that the two parties themselves can pursue and resolve. In some cases, it becomes, or it is already, a dispute, and then we'll get involved in identifying what the points of disagreement are, where there might be some scope for resolution, and then putting in train processes to support that. That might be through mediation, a conciliator providing some guidance, or in some specific circumstances, we might oversee an arbitration process. In the Australian economy, there are a number of areas in particular where there is a risk of unfair and unreasonable conduct because there's such an imbalance in power between the parties to commerce in those fields of effort. Let's think about a couple of them. Franchising. We know franchising works best. It's a great model for entrepreneurship where there's a mutually respecting, symbiotic, mutually supporting, mutually beneficial relationship between the parties. Occasionally, where a dispute arises, that adult to adult relationship might become quite parent-child, and the franchisor starts finger waving at the franchisee, and the franchisee's feeling quite disempowered and quite challenged in finding a resolution to a legitimate grievance. That's an example where government and policymakers have said, we can see how that could happen. What can we do to keep the parties playing nice and working collaboratively with each other? In the Australian economy, an industry code might emerge, and this has happened in a number of different areas. Industries themselves might decide that that's good for the industry. In other cases, regulators and government might get involved with different kinds of codes that have differing and increasing levels of compliance obligation and frankly, no choice about whether you need to participate and behave in accordance with the provisions of that code. I touched on franchising. There is an industry code for franchising, and in it is some dispute mechanisms which say, try and sort it out yourselves, but if that doesn't work, you can come to my agency, and then we oversee some dispute resolution processes that may, if the parties agree, even result in an arbitration process. Similar things exist in the oil code. Imagine there's not that many oil refiners, fewer these days, and not that many oil wholesalers, but lots of small businesses that are supplying customers. You can see how a power imbalance might arise because of that dependency that the smaller business may have on the larger one. Similarly, and I know we've got some rural producers on the call, in the dairy industry, there's a dairy code. You might have lots of dairy farmers producing outstanding quality milk, but only one or maybe two processors, and you can see how things might get off track. Similar with the relationships in the food and grocery sector, where there's such a high dependency on supermarket chains that might see smaller businesses pushed around and have their legitimate economic interest harmed by the lack of empowerment in that commercial relationship. We get involved in that space. Communicate is down in the bottom right-hand corner. Where we see things that are going on, we might put out some guidance. We might showcase and highlight better practice examples or guidance to people to say, hey, before you enter into this type of transaction, think about these sorts of things. This comes out of the assistance cases that come our way. We might see a pattern of businesses finding themselves in a difficult situation, and then we will proactively go out there and say, watch out for this kind of conduct, these arrangements that might cross your doorstep, think carefully about them, or here's some examples of businesses doing great things with different tools that they use or ways they collaborate with big business. We'll showcase those points and hopefully empower and build the know-how of the small business community through that work. We also make sure that the broader Australian public understands that small business is a big deal, not only in our economy, but in the vitality in the communities in which we live. And then finally, we inform. We do try and bring together really credible research. A lot of it might be born out of field evidence, where we then go and do some deeper dive around research, data analytics, and then showcase that to let people know, decision makers know what's going on in the small business community. Let's rocket forward to the next slide. I touched on the advocacy function. Here's a quick overview. How do we go about it? What do we do? Obviously, our network with organizations, including this one, gives us insights and maybe some tips, maybe some ahas about where we could do some positive and constructive work, where we could do some problem solving, where we can recommend solutions or better paths forward to support enterprising men and women be their best selves in the Australian economy and make that full contribution. A couple of recent examples. Australia Post thought it was a good idea to discontinue their perishable goods delivery. Now, we knew that would be devastating for many producers, particularly rural and regional producers that relied on Australia Post. We became an advocate, got involved with Australia Post, problem solved, and now that's all sorted, and that vital channel into key markets is still available and is still something that people can count on as part of their business relationship. We might get involved with regulators. Regulators may have some ideas about more regulation, and we might say, hang on a minute, that might make sense to a big corporate that's got 30 people in a compliance office, but we're talking about businesses that might have 3 people needing to navigate those rules, and we'll get involved as an advocate to say, are these rules right-sized? Are they reasonable? Are they a minimum necessary intrusion and imposition on smaller businesses? Have you thought about the way your regulatory intentions will work out for smaller respondents that are the small business community of Australia? And part of that role is we can inquire under the legislation that, ironically, I introduced for the agency I now lead. That's interesting and quite unexpected. We can get referrals from government about concerns or areas where they think some good policy work could be done, relying upon a good network of contacts with small businesses and an ability to speak directly to small business. They might ask us to do some inquiry work for them. Or we might initiate an inquiry ourselves. where we see a pattern of concerns, and I'll use the powers in the legislation that we have to actually initiate and carry out that inquiry process, which includes some powers to require and to seek and to manage information that might not otherwise be generally available. So that's a bit of a feel for what we do in that advocacy space. Flipping on to the next one, we touched briefly on that assistance function, and I gave you some examples there around dispute resolution and the guidance that we offer. But we also have a role in the relationship between small business and the tax office. My agency offers a tax concierge service, an ATO concierge service, where you might get a determination from the tax office and be very concerned about not only the content of it, but the enormous powers that the tax office has. And you're wondering, where can you get some help? Well, that help is us. We can work quietly with the tax office where we think in a tax assessment or something the ATA is doing is not quite right. If the ATO, we think they may have got it wrong, we piloted a project that says, can you let someone else unrelated to the tax official that made a determination about the tax liability of a small business, can you perhaps give that file to someone who's not seen it before and see whether they arrive at the same conclusion? If that still causes concern for the small business, they might think about challenging a determination. That goes to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, not a process people are familiar with, but our people are. So we'll get alongside that small business to actually reality check whether their expectations of the tax office and their assessment is reasonable. We will help part fund a tax lawyer to look over the matter, and then the small business can get some advice on whether they should challenge a tax office determination at the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and then we'll also get involved with connecting with that AAT process and getting reasonable advice. So that's another area where we do some work and bring some of our alternative dispute resolution skills and competency to that goal of resolving disputes and getting business back to business. Finally, on the inform one, that's our job in trying to shine a spotlight, highlighting, elevating and increasing the awareness of policymakers, ministers, government bureaucrats about the impacts of things that they're doing or thinking of doing. And we rely very heavily on getting really good quality authoritative data so that when we say to a government agency or a minister, we think you might have got this wrong, it's not just the top of the brain thought, it's something we've analysed deeply, and we can be very trusted with credible advice and insights that hopefully will bring about change with those decision makers. Next page, please. Just skating through this material, that's a bit of a picture of the assistance calls we get. People ring our helpline and get some immediate advice, or it might be escalated to a team of case managers in our assistance and our information function area. I call them the Justice League. Normally they get called upon where there's an injustice or a perceived injustice that has arisen, and then we get involved to try and help the small or family business navigate that, often with a bigger business or even government as the other party that's causing them some grief. Quickly looking at that, a little over a third of the cases that come to us are a contractual matter. People not doing what they said they were going to do, not fulfilling their contractual obligations, claiming they'd get they'd do certain work and then not actually doing that. So those contractual obligations where we would get involved. The next one's around payment. Almost a quarter of the calls we get relate to payments not being made in a timely way, someone holding back some cash from leverage, a dispute over whether monies have been earned. And in some cases, sadly, it's bigger businesses just saying, no, we just rather keep the money with us for our cash flow purposes, and you can wait a bit longer. Now, we know cash flow is a crucial factor in business survival, and we've been very active trying to improve the performance of big business and government in paying their bills on time so that they can be good to business by being a good business themselves, recognizing that what they're doing is quite harmful to the businesses that they're dealing with. Whole bunch of franchise code issues. About 1 in 10 of the matters that come to us is about franchising, and then another 1 in 10 is either a lease dispute or a financial service insurance matter. Now, we don't always resolve those because there is a complaints authority, AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, that have specific powers, and we would warm refer to them as part of our concierge service. But in some cases, the finance piece might be just a small bit of it, and doesn't resolve the complete problem. Let's think of linked credit contracts, where we might agree, an advertising agency said, here's a big screen TV to put in your restaurant, put your menu up there, and we'll run some ads in it as well about local businesses. It'll cost you nothing. You get to keep the TV. How good does that sound? The ad agency racks off and leaves it, and then you get an invoice off the person that's provided the television saying, hang on, you've got lease payments to make on this. And you go, it's supposed to be free. Oh, no, that was with the other people. They've gone. So now you're left with the financial obligation to pay for that hardware. We get a little bit involved in those sorts of things. So next slide, please. I'll better keep the show moving because I know we're on a tight time. This is just some of that communication role that we talked about, knowledge sharing, letting people know that help is here. But importantly, we might engage in trying to influence government or regulators. We're doing that right now around least cost routing, where you see some of the big financial institutions are sort of steering payment transaction traffic over Visa and MasterCard because there's an economic upside to the banks in particular if they have a certain volume of traffic that's run through those channels, but they actually might be a more expensive way of getting payments through to the small business than say FPOS. Why is the small business having to prop up that kind of a commercial arrangement to the advantage of banks when there's a lower cost payment pathway available? We're just sort of saying, hang on, that's not cool. You shouldn't fit up small business merchants with more expensive payment banking service fees than they need to. We're working busily in that space, and that's where we use our communication tools. And we also want to let everybody know about the plight of small business and family enterprise owners and leaders. That's a big challenge, a big responsibility, but it delivers enormous benefits to the economy as well as a great deal of personal satisfaction for those business leaders. But we want to tell that story so that, not just us on this call and me and others are champions of what you do. Everybody's a champion of the entrepreneurship that you all display and the opportunities and livelihoods that you make possible because of that commitment to your business. So that's a story we never get tired of telling. We also try and let people know about grants and government programs that are around. They can sometimes be hard to navigate, but that's part of our communication function. Next slide, please. Into COVID. COVID's been very tough on small business, very tough. And a disproportionate burden of the economic harm of COVID has been carried by the small business community. Small businesses tend not to have as deeper pockets. Their cash reserves and their ability to adapt and their resilience in some of their business systems might not be as deep and as sophisticated as larger businesses. You don't have shareholders you can go back to and say, well, can you just pop another couple of $100 million into our business to keep the cash flow alive whilst we navigate through COVID? These are choices that aren't available to many small businesses. So some of that ability to stay afloat during challenging COVID times through economic constraints, not of the making of small business, has been very challenging. Very, very challenging. And look, we've seen these numbers. 2 out of 5 small businesses are really worried about how they'll fund their business when the government support measures come to an end. And it's not just about keeping a pulse in the business. It's about funding the uplift on the other side. And I keep saying to government and policymakers, small businesses are a bit like aircraft. When they're sitting at the start of the runway about to try and trundle down to take off, there's no time when they're burning more resources, cash, and testing their systems than when they're running down the runway and they haven't even taken off yet. And so there's a need for resourcing for the recovery and the re-engagement as there is during the COVID lockdown and economic constraints. And that's clear what's coming through in the numbers. There's also been a number, though, it's interesting, that without a significant improvement in trading conditions, 1 in 3 businesses aren't sure they can survive this time. So it's one thing to say, I'm getting through COVID, but on the other side, what does my marketplace look like? If Diana and I owned a coffee shop in the ground floor foyer of a 40-story building in Melbourne, and we're used to having thousands of people walking past our door every day, being delighted by our offering. When the restraints come off and people are slow to return back to their workplace, a couple of hundred people walking past us is no basis for us to pay the rents, some of which we've deferred and have built up, off the base of thousands of patrons walking past our door. Is that going to work for us? Is the other side going to be something that we can navigate? And that's what 1 and 3 are talking about. It's interesting, just under half are expecting an uplift in revenue in the next 6 months. That's encouraging. And it's also worth noting some small businesses have had a really good pandemic. They've been doing things and delighting customers in ways that was really relevant and very responsive to the economic constraints of COVID. So not all businesses have found it tough. Some have found this a very profitable period. And in the case of some of the regional centres and outer metropolitan areas, the fact that fewer people are commuting into the CBD, there's actually been more economic activity outside the centres, outside the metropolitan hubs. And that's actually seen, well, I'm sorry for the economic jargon, the term is escape expenditure. This is where money you'd spend on goods and services in your own neighbourhood ends up being spent somewhere else because you're working somewhere else. That escapes expenditures come back home. And for those areas where we might domicile, there's actually been in some areas an uplift in economic activity, and that's been good for those local small businesses. What happens next? We're not sure. But interestingly, you see 4 out of 10 businesses have had to pivot, had to change the way they do business. And 1 in 5 have thought, this is pretty good. And I describe it as the hybrid economy on the other side. They're going to carry forward some of the adaptations and innovations to get through COVID and embed them in their business going forward on the other side because it's worked for them. So next slide, please. So what does that all mean? In terms of planning your business for a COVID-constrained world, here's just a couple of quick tips. And I don't want to spend too much time on them because our time is short together. But what's your why? What's the problem you're solving? What are those things in a post-COVID world actually point to me still having something that will delight other customers? What's the passion? What's the product or service that people really want a piece of? And what's our point of uniqueness? Always keep an eye on that. And that will shift and change because our audience, our market is shifting and changing throughout COVID, which leads into the next point. You need a need to solve. And that's where a business arises. COVID's created new problems, new challenges, and there's new opportunities emerge because people are finding ways of solving them. And what we've found over the years is women in particular often see a problem, solve it for themselves, share it with their network, and their network says, gee, that's a good idea. How about you help that with me? And before you know it, there's a business idea, an entrepreneurial opportunity born out of solving a problem. And COVID's created a whole bunch of new problems that are a whole bunch of new business opportunities. It's talking about digital. Digital is going to be crucial. Digital is crucial because it's new channels to customers. It's a better way of letting people know what you're about, what's unique and special about your offering, but also offers business efficiencies. A lot of people think digital is just e-commerce. Well, no, it's not, but that can be part of it. We are finding more and more small businesses are realizing I didn't get into business to actually run the back end of my business. I got into it because of a passion. And here's some technology that helps me do all that other stuff, that routine, administrative, admin stuff that drives me spare. Technology is making that so much easier, and I can focus on the magic that I bring. So digital is going to be increasingly important, not just as new channels to customers, new ways of communicating to explain what's special and unique about what you do, but also in streamlining the efficiency of your business, RegTech's making compliance easier. If you're not involved with digital engagement in your business, be assured your competitors are. So that's real focus that I'd encourage people to turn on, to really focus in on. And I'm talking about those networks, those stories that digital can bring to life are the authenticity of your business. The referral economy of decades gone is now something enabled through your network using some of these technologies. And those social marketing channels are vital in that story. And we saw this during COVID. Businesses doing social marketing at a relationships level. They were talking with and to their community and their customers about what was going on in their world and what the business's part is in the customer's world. And you saw this codependency at a local community level that all of a sudden people were realizing, I really value those businesses. Maybe I've got to get behind them to make sure they're there for the future. Kicking on though, this has been a time of great challenge, and reservoirs of cash reserves and emotional resilience have been really tapped. And so creating a recession-proof business plan that factors in these resilience buffers. You know, we saw some interesting numbers about the amount of days in cash a small business holds, you know, and often that might only be about 35, 36 days of cash. But what happens after that? Well, cash has run out. Now, in many businesses, they're reaching into their own personal finances, their assets, you know, the bank of mum and dad, all those sorts of things. But, you know, to build in your business planning, those contingencies and those correction capabilities is an increasingly important part. And finally, take care of you. This has been punishing for so many small business owners. It's been a time when the responsibilities of owning and running a business have never been more prominent in people's minds. The sense of your own family and the livelihoods that depend on your business success and your team. They're so close to you. You feel the bumps. That can be overwhelming for many. And it's been one of the key reasons why we've added additional support. And I keep talking about emotional wellness as a key business acumen to help you be your best to navigate your business. Next slide, please. And that's where support's available. I touched earlier on guidance in terms of government help that's available, explaining some of the programs. And then in that My Business Health tile that you see just to the right of your screen, you know, we talk about some keeping my business afloat, a little bit of how-to, a little bit of know-how sharing, a little bit of resources. How do I manage my business? That's got some growth and business planning and some ideas and some ahas that might be useful. But that last tile is incredibly important. I need support. That is talking about you as the business leader and owner, and there's heavy responsibilities and additional challenges and uncertainties that COVID has brought forward. And for many, that's been completely overwhelming. Sleepless nights, an inability to focus, concerns, catastrophizing challenges, not being your fresh best self with engagement, and also the impact that can have on the leadership you provide your team. In the top corner of that right-hand tile, there's the new access support for small business owners. This is a coaching program devised through my agency and Beyond Blue for 10 free coaching lessons with a small business owner who can empathize and understand your journey, who has access to clinical support and counseling guidance to help navigate those emotional health challenges that you're finding, provide you new tools to understand and manage what's going on in your own mental health, and then prepare you to not only resolve and the challenges that you need to address now, but be in great shape for the future. If you're feeling that that would be a benefit for you, don't hesitate to get onto it. Next slide, please. A little bit of a distraction, but something I just put to you. Really need to think about what the plan is. You know, digital is crucial. Cash, absolutely vital. And that little story there is business leaders around the table posing that question. What if we don't change at all and something magical just happens? Ladies, hope is not a plan. Next slide, please. Quick few moments on digitization. Real crucial element for people to be competitive. And I said earlier, if you're not looking to take advantage of digital engagement opportunities, your competitors are. This is why it's so important. And it's a stat down in the bottom corner there about even during COVID, you know, nearly 2 in 5 found themselves more productive because they'd used technology. A third were more profitable. But interestingly, 85% of all small business owners, according to MyOb's research, who'd used and engaged more deeply with digital tools to say, we're going to stick with this. This works for us, and it's going to be a key to our future. Next slide, please. This just lets you know a little bit about what our advocacy is at this current time around COVID. You know, if there's going to be implementation plans and pathways, make sure that they are dependably implemented. We're saying to government and policymakers, if you say you're going to do something, can you do it? because the biggest challenge small businesses are facing now is the uncertainty. If you're going to make have people thinking that X and Y is going to happen at this date, make sure it happens, so that there's at least some dependability that can be given to those plans. Have small business front of mind, get them around the table. Make sure that we don't see payment times sneaking out. Also, where there's support available, don't make it so darn complicated that time-poor small businesses can't readily tap into it. And finally, if you're going to put rules out there, can you make them actionable? You know, where there are clear action steps that can be taken from those rules. These general guidance and principle things, that's fine if you've got, you know, half a dozen lawyers that can interpret them for you. But if they're clear and actionable, that's the best thing you can do for small business. And that's a message that we shared across the National Small Business Commissioners meeting, which I'm involved with, and the state small businesses are involved with too. Rocket on to the next one. This is just around exporting. I won't spend too much time on it because I know it's of great interest to you, but it really paints the picture that there's so much more we as an economy can do to have SMEs involved in exporting. Now, about 14% is the share of SMEs export contribution. In the G7, it's around 25. In the EU, it's 35. So there's enormous opportunities there to uplift, and there's some great advantages, as I've outlined in the on the right-hand side, about getting involved in exporting. Now, Diana, you've emerged looking magnificent on the screen in my eyes. The next slide I can just make sure is shared, if we can just have a quick look at it, with the team. Look, there's just a little bit of information there about how to prepare for the future. And also what the challenges are to support exporting. And then on the next slide, a couple of links I'd encourage your audience to go to, where there's some useful information about engaging in trade, what you can do to prepare for it. Finally, the last slide is we are here to help. My aim is for my agency to be the best ally small business and family enterprises can have. That's how you contact me. That's why I was delighted to accept Diana's invitation to be with you today. And that's why I wish you all the very best with your enterprise, and reassure you I'm doing all I can to make sure the winds are in your sails, not in your face. That's what we do when we get out of bed every day. Thank you for your time today.
Terrific. Now, I do know that we have a number of panelists, and I do know, Bruce, that you have to leave very, very quick, I believe, at the top of the hour. So perhaps what we might do for the panelists, I will bring them up in the order that we have in the agenda, but rather than two questions, just ask one question, if you would. Just say, well, I'll introduce your name and business. We probably don't have time to explain a little bit more of a background of your business, but then Bruce can answer that. And I know that we have emailed Bruce and his office your other questions, and I'm sure that they will be able to follow up. So let's bring Tony on the screen. Tony, if you would like to ask your question of Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm a sheep farmer, and I have value-added my products, and I've been exporting into the Middle East. That stopped with COVID. But my question today is around regulations and export license fees. In 1 year as a small business, I have spent over $35,000 across 6 licenses to be able to export into the Middle East. There was no scale based on turnover, so I was paying the same amount as a large enterprise, and I find that completely unfair.
I agree with you. I want your case study, Tony. Why do I say that? Right now, there is work being led by the Prime Minister's office about regulator performance. We've made a submission to that inquiry that's being led, and Ben Morton, who's been leading the deregulation work at a Commonwealth level, has been very interested in what we've had to say. We've been making the same point you've been making. Why are these fees structured in a way that doesn't discern between behemoths and smaller specialist exporters, or even in the area like Therapeutic Goods Administration? A whole bunch of these regulators are self-funding. That means they set fees to cover their own work. But because of that, we're arguing, where's the discipline around efficiencies in the work that they do, and not just going out and, you know, tapping you and others just to get more fees to fund work that might not be necessary, but represents an enormous impost on you. So that work's going on right now. Offline, let's catch up. I'd love to surface yours as a case study. There's also some Austrade agribusiness guidance through their agribusiness expansion initiative that might be useful to you. And there's even some work going on one of the other issues I know you have around freight and a few things. So,
Yep.
you know, I think we can help there. And through Diana, let's catch up. Let's surface your case study, and let's see what we can get done.
Great.
Terrific.
Thank you.
And of course, Tony, you're from Barton Small Good. So now we will introduce Vivian Ferrari from Alpna Winery. So Viviana, please ask your question.
Hello all, and hello, Bruce.
Hi, Viviana.
Yes, we run a winery, a rather small winery, but we run it at a rather international level, as you know, and our international business at the moment has been particularly slowed due to all a series of reasons we all know and we won't discuss now. Hopefully we'll get back together. Definitely working very hard on that. Seeing that the wine business quite different from other sort of retail business, especially talking with restaurants or clients, local or not local. Much of it happens in person. So as much as in the past year, a lot has happened digitally. Even last night I had the digital tasting, but it was always in light of the actual tasting that's going to happen when things unlock. Now, I envisage that very soon, in a few weeks, we will all be freer and we can start our relationships. But my problem is as I put forward is double. So my regards is what happens with all the clients when they come in on our premises, whether it's the office, the vineyard, the winery, the cellar door, and they think they might have caught the virus right there. What are the liabilities and the risks? And then there is the opposite question, the same thing. So I have my staff having to go to meetings, to shows, to restaurants to discuss, and they might think they got the virus in that minute, that position. And because the perception of the virus is so altered in this particular period of fear, how can we, company, make sure that we do the best to our staff and our patrons?
Yeah, look, Vivian, very vivid example of a real problem that we are hearing about right across the country. We've had a couple of things to say about it. One is some of the guidance that's available is really needs a lot of interpretation and doesn't give you solid footing on what to do. So I showed in that earlier slide that actionable information. We're sort of saying it's fine if you're an enormous business, you can get all your lawyers and your work safety people coming up with a tailored plan, but what does a small business actually need to do? So that's what we've been pressing for, Vivian. That's not there at the moment. And the uncertainty that you're feeling, sadly, is shared right across the economy. We've actually been saying, well, we've used health orders to shut down businesses. Why are we using health orders to map the pathway to open them? That I don't understand. So we've been sort of saying, well, why aren't the state health officials saying, here's what you need to do and give you very specific guidance? The question around liability for your employers is something that I've seen discussed but not adequately answered. And this is also part of the story around what you can do to strongly encourage people to get vaccinated. I did say, a business owner shouldn't have to be a bouncer as well. I mean, how do you manage who's coming onto your premise? It's not just the wine and the nectar of the grape that people love. That Ulupana winery experience is as much a delight as it is as well. And so that, that's the real challenge. So we're staying involved with that. In Victoria, they've got that all workers in Melbourne and regional Australia that are on in regional Victoria that are on the authorised worker list. I don't know whether you've checked that out, but you might want to see if your staff are on that authorised worker list. And they've basically said they've got to have at least one COVID vaccination dose within a week's time and be fully double dosed by the 26th of November. So, I mean, that's your workplace opportunity, but then the whole issue of managing who comes onto your premises, we're still up and about trying to advocate for greater clarity around that.
Yeah, and also that's only some sort of a mandate. The businesses we do not have to accept such a rule. That's only a suggestion. Yes.
Yeah.
Just a suggestion.
Bruce, thank you so
we
much.
can't
I
order the
think
clients
you
what to
need
do.
to go very, very quickly. So I don't know if you want to do one very quick question from Eugenia, if you've got time, or if
Please.
you have to go. All right. So Eugenia, please snapshot your question. You are
Sure.
from Loomis Gallery. So Eugenia, ask your question, please.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for a very informative session. I own an art gallery in Richmond, which has been it performed quite well in 2020. We've been around for 6 years, but this lockdown, we're finding it extremely hard. But I guess many businesses aren't can't really be different to others. But my question is not about that. My question is actually about importing, not exporting. Our production house is in Germany, and we produce everything overseas. And because we've found the quality versus price is very comparative, so we import everything. So my biggest challenge has been from day one is to get some sort of help to understand how importing works, what the terms are, actually having a guide. And even now, 6 years in, I still find myself a little bit in the dark using shipping agents, and quite often it's like, whew, the magic happens and it's here. But having some sort of guidelines, or I don't know, something that actually helps people like myself, that's something that I would love to
Look,
see.
I respect the challenges you're facing. The bodacious Mrs. Billson and I used to own a gallery, and so I know how challenging that is. And good congratulations for what you've achieved thus far. Probably the most direct thing I could suggest is on the business.gov.au website, there is actually some resources called Importing and Your Business. Now, that's good guidance on navigating some of the things that you've talked about. The other thing I would suggest is it's possibly a good move to, in addition to being a part of this organisation, tap into some other peer group organisations. I mean, even the Export Council of Australia, who tend to be exporting, they have trade competencies there and trade networks that you can tap into around freight forwarding. Right now, it's hard getting stuff moved. Empty bellies on aircraft aren't there when planes aren't flying. There's backlogs of containers. I mean, there's all sorts of challenges. They've got practical experience, and people just like you navigating those. And one of the best things I can recommend about networking groups like the one you're part of here with Diana is often other people have had the very same challenge, and you can benefit from their insights. And that's a pathway that gives you insights yourself about what you can do in your business. So I'd look to those two channels if I could recommend them, and wish you all the very best as
Thank
I have
you.
to sign off to go on to another webinar. But Diana, thank you so much for having me today. To those participating in the webinar, I hope you've got some value out of it. And hopefully those presentations with some hyperlinks in them can be shared out, and a chance to reflect on some of my remarks, which I hope have been helpful and useful today. But thank you for having me.
Thank you so very much, Bruce, for your time and wonderful presentation. And I know you have to get going.
I'd just like to thank you, Bruce, for giving a very, very informative conversation. We had 2 more people lined up to speak with you, but we've actually now run out of time for them, and I'm very disappointed because they're really great questions to ask. But look, thank you for a very informative talk, and a lot of it really resonated with a lot of us. And
Fantastic.
I hope that we can call you back again, and maybe we can have the panel just asking you questions next time. But
Great.
gosh, your speech was fantastic. Loved it.
Thanks, Diana. You're very kind. I must fly, but take care, and together let's energize enterprise.
Absolutely. Absolutely.